Thank you all for joining our webinar today. We'll be focused on the topic of bringing portfolio modeling within the Microsoft PPM solutions. My name is Annie Levand, and I'm with a Microsoft Gold partner called PROJILITY. We've been implementing Microsoft project and portfolio management solutions for over 17 years for large enterprises, including everything from engineering, construction, IT, and new product development. PMOs and CIOs typically come to us when they can't easily explain what's going on across all their projects. They don't know what resources are working on what work, and they have a hard time getting consistent reports, metrics, and dashboards to make project-based decisions. We're known for having a 98% on time and budget track record for successfully implementing these solutions for clients. We offer services and solutions in three core areas: deployment and consulting services, PROJILITY's core business. We provide professional services for successfully planning and implementing Microsoft project and portfolio management, including Microsoft Project Online, integrating PPM with a line of business applications, and delivering strategic portfolio management solutions to support top-level management planning. We also have a growing Microsoft Power Platform practice where we are actively working with clients to build applications, workflows, and reports to automate their most important business processes. ProJility also offers a set of pre-built software solutions and accelerators based upon 17 years of experience, including a set of Hammerhead products that provide improved access to your cloud PPM data, accelerate access to visual reports and dashboards using Power BI, connect data between your PPM system with Microsoft Teams, and extend connectivity into Active Directory to improve visibility, insight, and control over your work, people, and projects. Finally, ProJility provides post-implementation support services, including expert care, designed to assist your PMO with gaining on-demand expertise on the solution supported. We have a full online automated e-learning offering that can improve consistency and adoption for your users of your project management tools. We do have a set of upcoming webinars covering topics including portfolio modeling through learning what's new and coming next with the Project for the Web Light Touch project management solution from Microsoft. Our next virtual project conference is October 13th. We will be hosting guest speakers to talk about their experiences. All webinars will start at 1 p.m. Eastern. You can register for one or multiple events through the Eventbrite link provided, or by searching Eventbrite ProJility in your browser. Hope you can join us for these sessions, which were designed based upon your feedback over the last 6 months. If you missed the ProJility Virtual Project Conference in April, you can now watch it online. It's broken into 3 sessions: a session on Agile and Waterfall projects, a panel of 3 experienced clients answering questions on their PPM deployments and adoption, and a session focused on the direction of project management tools market. You can visit the link here, which takes you to the YouTube playlist with these videos posted. All videos from this and previous series are now available on our best practice playlist on YouTube listed on this page. Topics range from managing your digital transformation program using PPM technologies to integrating PPM with Agile and line of business applications. Feel free to subscribe and access this library at any time and share with your colleagues. With that, I'll hand the presentation over to Rob Hirschman, partner here at ProJility. Rob, the floor is yours.
Thanks, Annie. Thanks, everyone, for joining. So one of the big requests we had from a lot of folks is we're more interested in how to do portfolio modeling, strategic portfolio management within their Microsoft PPM systems. So we've come up with some content today to introduce you to some of the core concepts of portfolio modeling. What is it all about? What components does PPM support as it relates to these processes? Give you a short software demonstration to show you some possibilities with the tools, and give you some guidance for how to not only get started going down the road with doing portfolio modeling, but also how do you plan and deploy this technology in your environment. Finally, we'll answer some questions at the end. If you want to add them to the Q&A manager, we'll take them towards the end of today's meeting. So what is portfolio modeling? Really at the core of it, it's really a technique or a methodology that lets you align projects you have coming in with your strategic goals. And really the vision is to maximize the benefit you're going to get out of these projects to make sure you're prioritizing them effectively. And that can be done at different levels. If you look at the chart here, it can be done at an enterprise level. It can be done at a group level. It could be done at a department level. You could go down to the portfolio level, and ultimately you can roll it up to the entire enterprise. So you have the ability to have people across the organization doing this. And ideally, when we define a portfolio, it can mean many different things. Typically, a portfolio in most enterprises, whether it's public sector or commercial industry, is led or owned by somebody. And that is typically a portfolio manager who manages a team of people that are dedicated to delivering the projects within that portfolio. Now, in a matrixed organization where it's cross-functional, you may be borrowing resources from different places. At the end of the day, you own the delivery of that portfolio, and you've really got to work with people across the enterprise to do that. So from a structural perspective and a process perspective, we look at portfolio modeling really as a procedure and a process. And one of the big questions is, why should we do strategic portfolio modeling? And this is actually from a Gartner report of about 9 or 10 years ago. There's really two sides to portfolio management. At the bottom, we look at the value of project management. That's the delivery and execution of your projects. On the left-hand side, the up and down, we see the value of portfolio management. And so what the industry analysts will tell you is, improving your project management can definitely add value, but how you really get to a point of getting access to unrealized value in the organization is by making strategic improvements to your portfolio. And that can mean a couple of things. It can mean reducing the load of projects you have to focus on the high value projects, meaning not doing everything, doing the right things. It can mean actually adding projects that add more value, or it can mean remixing your projects or reallocating your resources in a way where you're going to get more return on investment from your projects. So while a lot of organizations we work with are really focused on that blocking and tackling, if you choose the wrong projects, a lot of times it really doesn't matter how well you do on those projects if they're the wrong projects to do. So we look at that unrealized value gap as really the ability to improve portfolio management and decision making, and that's where portfolio modeling comes into play. And even if we look at it from a PPM process perspective, you start thinking about how your organization is structured. You've got a creation phase. You've got maybe a formal portfolio selection phase where you're making decisions on the investments and the projects, the applications you're going to support. You've got a detailed planning phase where you're going to be actually planning out the work, delivering the work through the manage phase, and then into a reporting phase as well. And if we think about the different processes that fit into an overall PPM lifecycle, it all begins with demand management on the top left and having some kind of a funnel of intake coming in for potential work and potential projects. We get into the selection phase, that's when we're really going to be doing our portfolio modeling. And demand management can come full circle. We can be delivering projects, but we want to put projects that are active back in our demand funnel to make sure we're actually staffing them effectively, delivering on them effectively, but do we really want to keep all the projects we have? Are there projects that are out there we might want to kill because they're not going to add any value, and reallocate our resources? But portfolio selection is really that process we're going to be focused on today, and it plays into every other process or procedure you see here. And this becomes really the bridge for you between your strategy and your execution. Before you go and execute, you want to determine what you're going to do and how well does it align with your business strategy. And even if we look at Project Management Institute, the PMI, they have a specific methodology and approach for this. They see it as a portfolio management process, and within that you have different processes. On the left, you have strategic planning, where you're doing your current plan. That flows down into the alignment of different process groups. That's where you're identifying different projects and initiatives, you're categorizing those, you're doing an evaluation of those, you're doing a formal selection of those, and you're also doing your prioritization. What comes first and last, and how are we going to prioritize those? And then we can come back once we go into execution and start doing our portfolio balancing, but then we get our authorization on that. So in the PMI world, we do look at that phase as portfolio modeling is a really important part of this. So if you have adopted PMI's methodology for your PMO or your project management shop, it is going to play directly into those strategies. Well, let's get right into how Microsoft PPM and Project Online support portfolio modeling. There are specific components that are built into the tool. A lot of people aren't familiar with these. A lot of folks are familiar with the scheduling, the resource management, the time tracking, the reporting, and the blocking and tackling. But PPM, ever since 2007, has incorporated portfolio management capabilities that are more strategic in nature. The beginning of it all starts with having an intake mechanism and being able to do intake management in the tool. This really gives you the ability to capture new project requests and work requests that are coming in, and also capture information like cost, resources, and priority. In our PPM system, we use something called a project detail page, which is a form to capture different information from an end user. And then we also apply a workflow to that that's going to route those requests for different stage gates and approvals, and so that we can get to a point where we're ready to perform that analysis. So it's kind of a vetting up front of the process. The goal here is to really ensure we have consistent capturing, governance, documentation, and controls over any new requests coming in. So they're all coming in through one funnel. Some organizations work with put all their project requests into PPM. Some put them all into a help desk application, like an IT service management application, and then flow them into the PPM system when they're trying to prioritize their projects. You have lots of different options how you do this, and Project Online is very flexible to support multiple approaches and tools. When we look at that formalized intake process, there are those two components that are pretty important. You're going to have a series of request forms. This can be everything from an idea form that flows into a potential project to a formal project request form like the one you see on the screen. And this is where we're going to capture project name, description, maybe the potential start date, the department, the type of project, who's the sponsor, any basic business information to get it into our queue. And then at the bottom, we're going to apply a governance workflow and approval, so it moves through different stage gates. And as part of those stage gates, portfolio modeling and analysis could be a defined process where a project doesn't get from selection to planning until it goes through that process and gets formally vetted in the tool. The nice thing about it is it's very flexible, these tools. You can actually do portfolio modeling outside of your workflow. You can do it as part of your workflow, or you can do it anytime you want. You have the ability to go in. So you really do control when it happens and how it happens in the tool. But the beginning of the process of starting to define how you're going to score your projects, something in the tool called business drivers. And what business drivers are, the real purpose here is to capture the objectives of the organization. What are the things that drive the organization forward? In a commercial world, we're very focused on revenue recognition or product quality, like you see on the right, or employee satisfaction or customer sat. In the public sector world, we're looking at things like patient safety and quality in healthcare, or constituent planning and things like that. So what we do is we create these business drivers, and then we create a ranking score behind each. For instance, for improving customer satisfaction, how does this project we have coming in align with no, moderate, strong, and extreme? We're going to define those different thresholds, and those become our business drivers that we're going to score every project against. Some key things about business drivers, number one, they accurately reflect the objectives of the organization. And this is the harder part than the tool. It's sitting down and making sure everybody understands and agrees on what our objectives and business drivers are. The other part that's harder sometimes is quantifying this and measuring it. Sometimes we can't put a number behind it. We can say low, medium, high, level of risk, low, medium, high, safety and security, low, medium, high, but other times around things like financials or quality or something like customer satisfaction, we can measure that with a specific metric. So these can be both soft and hard, but they have to be quantifiable and measured in some way. So business drivers become the foundation for doing any kind of portfolio modeling you're going to do. Then within the tool, what we do is we take those business drivers and we capture all those in the tool. And we start to prioritize those. What we want to do is we want to capture those values and the goals of the organization. And then we have those impact statements we mentioned before. And that's how we actually align projects with the drivers. Some examples here are this project increases customer satisfaction 2 to 3%. Or the product reduces our expenses from 500 to $1 million, which may make it high or it may make it low. You can determine what those thresholds are. And then what the system's going to do is, based off that and getting some feedback from some of your stakeholders, the system has the ability to calculate the priorities of this. And how it does that, if you look at the chart on the right, it uses something called a pairwise matrix. And it allows us to take a business driver on the left, expanding in new markets, compare it to a business driver on the right, financial impact. Is it more important, less important, equally as important as one or the other? So essentially what you're doing at a PMO level, you're guiding your executive through asking these questions. Based off that feedback, what the solution does, it actually aggregates that information on the bottom right and tells you, based off the feedback our CRO is telling us, our number one business driver is growing in markets, followed by increasing market share, followed by financial impact, all the way down to employee customer satisfaction. So it's going to come up with a relative ranking or a calculated ranking for those business drivers based off the feedback from either an individual or a group of individuals that entered into the system. And this is logic that's been in the tool, again, since 2007, when Microsoft actually acquired some technology specifically to do this functionality. Now, you always have the ability to do what we call manual overdrive on this, or manual prioritization, where you're going to go in and say, well, our CIO says expanding new markets is 50%, increasing market share is 20%, financial impact is 10%. You can always override the engine if you want to and put your own prioritization in there. But it's always best practice to use what the tools have, because they're based off literally thousands of customers using these tools. The business driver prioritization is really important. And just to give you an idea as to, what are some sample business drivers that are out there? And this is a nice chart because it shows you the driver on the left, the alignment between no impact, low impact, moderate, strong, and extreme, and what that might mean. So if we're looking at something like the second one down, expanding to new markets, maybe we're actually trying to grow our business. No impact on that would be, doesn't impact at all. It's not growing any revenue. Low impact maybe, okay, we get about anywhere from $0 to $500,000 in new revenue. Moderate impact would be something like we're growing our revenue between 500,000 and $1 million. Strong impact would be $1 million to $3 million, and then extreme impact would be over $3 million. The key here is getting agreement on what those thresholds are. So when projects come in, you're measuring them consistently against key business drivers that are agreed to by the whole organization. And we find that most organizations that do this successfully, they don't start at an enterprise level. They start maybe at a program level or a portfolio level. They work with it that way, and then they grow this over time, because sometimes it's really hard to come up with these metrics. It's more of a process question than anything else. So once we've come up with our business drivers, we use that pairwise matrix in the tool to actually score them each. And then Project Online is going to give us these values. It's going to show us what's top, medium, and bottom. And then we're going to be able to actually layer this on top of a portfolio of potential projects or initiatives. And then that's going to drive our scoring, if you think about it. So if I have 5 new projects coming in, one of those aligns with increasing market share, one aligns with expanding in new markets, and then the other 3 align with employee sat. Given a certain limited amount of money and people, the system's probably going to prioritize the first 2 over the last 3 if I don't have all the money and the people. And it's going to allow you to run those different scenarios based off data. And the goal here is to be as objective as possible in the decision-making process using the tools and the techniques behind portfolio modeling. So once we get into it, we can actually go into the tool, and we'll show you this in the demo. We can do our portfolio analysis and selection. And the tool actually includes 5 different components that are all built together to do this. The idea here is really to come and answer the question, what should we do? Not how are we doing on it, but what are the right investments to make that give us the best value to the business? And that's going to align with the priorities we have of the organization, the money we have available, the people we have available to deliver on those projects, so that we can model these scenarios out, we can do what-if analysis, and we can compare potential solutions, come up with the problems of, what do I want to do and why am I going to do it? And so you see in the tool, it's going to walk us through the definition of a portfolio and all the things after that as it relates to these requirements. The first part of it is defining those properties. And this is the what, the rules of the portfolio. So we may say we're looking at the 2023 fiscal year portfolio as it relates to our digital transformation program. If we're defining it as that, we're actually going to insert projects and initiatives that relate to that program only, and we're going to use business drivers that relate to that program only. So what might they be? Well, if we're doing transformation, we may want to increase revenue, reduce our overhead, increase customer satisfaction and support, drive new products through the pipeline, whatever those are. Those are going to be different drivers than we have maybe at an enterprise level, or they may be a subset of those. So we begin by defining the properties of our portfolio and what's going to be a part of that. We then go to the next step, and that's where we're prioritizing our projects. This is going to help us really drive through and say what's top and bottom based off the business drivers and how each project aligns with those business drivers. We're then going to go, and the system is going to calculate this, again, based on algorithms, and it's going to prioritize our projects based off all of this feedback to show us what's top and bottom priority. And that really helps us understand, what are the projects that are probably going to be below the line if we don't have the money and the people to deliver on them. We then have 2 options around our analysis. We can do 2 kind of constraint analysis. The first one is on money. What is the budget we have to allocate to the potential projects we're thinking about doing? And that's the first one. The second one is, what are the resources? And these are separate but related constraints. If you think about it, I may have the money to support 80% of my projects, but once I move that over to the resources, I can only staff 40% of that 80%. So now I'm at a point where maybe I can afford them, but I don't have the resources to deliver on them. And it's really good to think about them as separate but related constraints, because they are something that's really going to limit your ability to deliver on projects. It's not just what gives us value, but how are we going to do it? So this starts to tie into the execution side. We start looking at these things like resource capacity and budget capacity here. That's all set up centrally in your PPM system. So once we get into the demo, you're going to see we're going to be able to do formal portfolio analysis. And you're going to see a bunch of things going on. You're going to see metrics on the left. You're going to see in the middle a picture of what projects we're going to do. You're going to see the priority that has been assigned to each project based off all the scoring and rankings. And then you're going to see other information after that, such as start dates or business drivers or sponsors or type of project. Does it have a resource plan or not? And how much money do we have to support it? The idea is that all the projects that you're going to do should be in your portfolio. There shouldn't be any outliers that just kind of skirt the process. And that ensures you're tying this into your budget, you're tying it into what's important to the organization, and you're actually able to deliver on what you're committing to, but you're making the right decisions. So let's hop into our demo, and I'm going to walk you through this and how this works in PPM. I'm in Microsoft Project Online. I'm in the web app. So I'm here in PWA, and I'm going to come down here to the left. You see I have a section that I've denoted as portfolio selection. So what we've done is we've organized our different functionality here in PPM based off what people need to do on a day-to-day basis. First part of that is that business driver library we mentioned. And this is where you're going to store all the different organizational business drivers you have. You see, we have a name for a business driver. We have a department, so we can localize these. We can have some of these that are unique to IT, some are new product development, some are finance or operations, and some may be enterprise where they apply to every department we have. This allows us to localize business drivers, but keep them all in one big repository. That's really the design of it. We're going to have a status of a business driver. Is it active or is it in the past? Meaning we don't use it anymore, but we want to keep it there to revisit it. When was the business driver created? Who created it? When was it modified and who was it modified by? For instance, if we take the first one, financial impact, when we come in here, at a PMO level, and people in the PMO are the ones, the PMO administrators and the PPM staff, they're the ones that are going to use this, not every typical user of the tool. You're going to set up that business driver. You're going to give it a description. You're going to apply it to one or multiple departments we have. That localizes it. Then we're going to say if it's an active business driver, what are the impact statements? And it's going to explain, each project can be measured against this business driver. So again, no alignment is 0, 0 to 250, 250 to 500, 500 to 750, maybe over $750,000. Those are our thresholds that drive financial impact from none to extreme. We set those business drivers up and they then end up in our intake forms. So we have to score and rate our projects against those business drivers. Then what we're going to do is we're going to be sitting down with an executive or a group of executives on a regular basis and prioritizing those business drivers as part of this process. So we may sit down with the CIO and say, okay, well, let's go through your priorities. Really 3 steps here. The first one is what priorities are important to the CIO this year? So we're going to set up the CIO priorities. Again, we're going to map it to the IT department. Then we're going to come down here and say, okay, there's 5 business drivers that are important to the CIO this fiscal period, whether it's a year or a quarter. Improving, expanding markets, financial impact, customer satisfaction. And then up here, we're going to say, is it calculated? And it's recommending that, rate the importance, and the system will tell us what's most and least important. Or do we want to go manual on this thing and we want to manually score each business driver? We can always override the system if we want. You're going to see a next button. When I click on that, it takes me to the next step. Now we're sitting with the CIO and we're saying, hey, Ms. CIO, let's compare these, expanding into new markets. How does that relate to financial impact? And it's using those same thresholds that we have for business drivers. It's more important than financials. Is this more or less important? It's equally as important as customer sat. It's extremely more important than employee satisfaction. And in this case, it's as important as increasing market share. So what the system does, it uses this pairwise and it takes the CIO or you driving into the PMO through a process of comparing each business driver. So now we're at financial impact. How does that relate to customer sat? How does it relate to employee sat? Improve customer sat is next, and it's just going to winnow it down until we've compared each business driver one to another. And finally, we'll get here to employee satisfaction. How does that relate to market share? It's less important. So once we go to review priorities, the 3rd step in the process, the system is actually going to show us now, this is our top and bottom priority. So for this planning period, for this CIO, it's going to be looking at all the projects in his or her group. You're going to start to see anything aligning with the top business drivers is in, the bottom are out. What we also get here is something called a consistency ratio. We want to make sure the feedback from the CIO is consistent, that one answer didn't conflict with another one. And if this starts dropping below about 65 or 70%, there's a lot of conflicts. You probably want to go back and rerun this model. So these are tools that are built into your PPM system, your project online system you can leverage today to get a prioritization. And finally, where the modeling actually happens, really the fun part of portfolio management, the portfolio analysis. This is where we can set up different groupings or portfolios. We may have one for our major projects. We may have one for just our digital transformation. We may have one just for agile projects we're thinking about doing in the second half of the year. We can do portfolios of any grouping of projects we want. And let's take a quick look at this 2022 major projects one. So again, here we go through this 5-step process. You'll see it at the top. The first step is defining the portfolio for major projects. We can apply it to a department. Again, we can localize it. We can say whose input do we want to use? The CIOs, the CTOs, the executive consensus one that came from all of our executives. Or we can do this with custom fields if we want to prioritize it in a different way. But then we want to do is decide what projects do we want to evaluate. If it's for the enterprise and we've got a workflow in place, we can see all the projects we're thinking about on the right and all the projects that are coming into our intake on the left. What we can do now is shortlist that and say, well, show me everything that's in the selection phase. Now we're just down to the project that needs to be evaluated against the other projects we have. Or for instance, maybe we want to look at just transformation program projects. This filters it over. So by setting up our intake and getting requests that are prioritized or calculated and put into different buckets like portfolios and programs and initiatives, we can then use those to sort and slice and dice these. We're then going to go down and determine what is our primary cost constraint. We're obviously going to have multiple ones, but maybe we want total cost of the project, or maybe we just want to look at first year cost, or maybe we want to look at ROI. We can look at different financial metrics as it relates to comparing our projects so we can come up with the right solutions. We can then also do our resource planning, and this is where we're going to look at how far out do we want to go. Is it a 1, 3, or 5 year look? Are we going to do any resource planning? If so, do we want to group this by role or skill or location or department? And then also down here, we have some options here to do force in and force out for different reasons. And then look at things like resource engagements, which are a way to forecast at a t-shirt level, different types of resources you might need on your projects. So we go through this process. And again, typically this is done by the PMO. It's not your typical project manager or somebody going into the tool. The next step is to prioritize our projects. So now that we've got all these projects that have come through our intake process, we want to look at how each project on the left, potential project, ranks against the business drivers that the CIO said were important. And you could see it's, for instance, on the apparel project, there is no alignment between this project and growing in new markets, but there's strong alignment with customer sat and moderate alignment with employee sat. You're taking a look at this with the stakeholders in the room and reviewing this. A lot of organizations we work with typically do this on a whiteboard or an Excel sheet, but it's got a lot of great algorithms in it. This is a data-driven way to do this, but you can also go and rescore it and say, well, this project does have strong alignment, or this one here does align with my business priorities here. You can re-rank and score it. It still keeps the original history. Once you've made those changes, it's going to take you to the next step. And this is where it's actually going to stack rank your projects. So now it's saying based off the CIO's drivers and then how you scored each project, it's going to stack rank your projects top to bottom. And this is where it can get a little bit emotional, where some of the stakeholders of some of the projects down here are going to go, well, wait a second, how did we get to that point? Why is my project a low priority? You're going to back up and you're going to look at the data. You're always going to have the ability to override this when you're making a selection and you're doing your modeling. But we want to take a data-driven look and say, okay, top project down to bottom project. The reality is we're probably not going to have all the money and the people, but we'll get to that next. So this is really kind of a nexus point for that discussion. If we agree that's our ranking, we're actually going to go into our model now. And our model begins with an assumption of we can do everything. We can afford everything. And what you'll see on the chart is a couple of things. On the left side, you'll see the total budget. So because we selected total cost as our primary constraint, total budget is going to show up here for the entire portfolio. And you can see it's a $16.1 million portfolio. There are 20 projects we're considering. We're targeting a strategic value of 100%. So what that means is if we can select the right projects, we have all the money and the people, we deliver effectively, we should realistically get full value from the portfolio. The reality is when we start selecting projects that are not of highest value, that's when that number is going to drop down. Or if we don't have the money to support them, again, the money is going to come down. We're assuming a perfect world scenario here. And on the right, you'll see the name of the project, the priority, the ability to force it in and out, the total budget, because we said that is our primary constraint. Has it been moved in or out? What workflow stage is it a part of? What type of a project is it? You can even start entering other information, custom information you've created like CapEx and OpEx, maybe revenue impact or a ranking if it's a product. So what we can do now is a couple of things. The second tab here on the left shows us our strategic alignment. And this is a really important graph because it shows us the light blue says, okay, how important is a business driver? The CIO said expanding new markets and increasing market share were number 1 and 2, but look at the dark blue. Our relative spend to that is fairly low. We're maybe 50% here, maybe 30% here. In fact, in the current portfolio, we've got more projects that help us improve employee alignment than drive new revenue. And that may be a problem. So we know right up front, we may have misalignment on our investments right from the start. We want to try to get these as aligned as possible. So how do we do that? Well, the first thing we can do is we can say, well, we don't have a $16 million budget this year. Our CIO has come down with $11 million budget. Let's plug in $11 million and see what kind of results the system can give us. It's going to run a portfolio scenario, as you can see here. It's going to come up here in a second, and it's going to show us what the system is recommending and how that aligns with our business values or our priorities here. So in this case, at an $11 million point, we've gone from 20 to 14 projects, and we can realize about 87% value from the portfolio. Because if you look at it, we've got all this unrealized value here. We can't afford these projects. You know, they're low value, medium to high cost, and that's about 12 or 13% of our portfolio. So we're getting it down to what we can afford and what's most strategic to the organization. And now we can see we've got our top projects here, these 14, followed by these other 6 here. Now, as a manager and executive, I may say, well, this is great, but I really need to do this payroll system. If we don't do that, we can't get people paid. So what we can do is we can force projects in and out based off specific criteria that you define at a PMO level. We can say this is a mandate or compliance. And by the way, this tax checker, we got to do that. We're going to be in compliance. So that's a compliance project. Up here, we can say, well, you know what, though? We know this hub project is out there. Maybe we'll do that next year. Or maybe this one here that's product specific, we'll force that out. What we can do is we can select the force in and out, and we can rerun the model at the same budget, and the system's going to rerun that and make some recommendations. So it's saying based off of that, we're still at the same budget point, about $11 million. We've gone from 87 to 83% value. So now we're selecting projects that are maybe lower strategic value, but we need to do them for compliance purposes. And we can run these scenarios and models, and we can save them. So this may be our 11 million compliance in model. And what we can do is we can then say, okay, when we sit down with our directors or managers, we've come up with a couple of scenarios. Let's compare them. There is a compare button here that actually lines all these scenarios up together. And what it's going to do, it's going to compare it against something called the efficient frontier on the left that says, for any bundle of investments we're going to make, there's a maximum return on investment we can get. We want to try to stay on that curve as we start to drop resources down. We want to stay as close to that line as possible. When we start dropping down from that line, that means we're doing non-strategic projects and we're not going to get as much potential value from the portfolio. So you can see here, each project is listed. We can see what we're doing in an $11 million compliance mode, $8 million mode, we're in cost cutting, 12 million, and the baseline. At the top, we can see for each scenario how many projects we've selected, what the strategic value is, and maybe the total budget or cost. The idea is it helps drive decision making on what we're going to do and why we're going to do it. If we're going to start doing non-strategic projects, that's okay. We just have to know the impact on the overall portfolio of doing that. Is it going to drive revenue, reduce cost, increase our expenses? What are those? We can do that portfolio modeling here. We can even look at this on a visual. And the visual shows us strategic value of each project on the left, total cost on the bottom axis. Any projects in the white are the ones the system is recommending come out. And it makes a lot of sense. It's high cost, medium to low value versus projects that are high value, maybe medium to low cost. Those are the projects we ideally want to do. So we can visualize this information, we can save these models, and then what we can do is if we're really comfortable with this, if we have a process or a workflow in place, we can commit these changes and it moves it to the next stage in our approval process. So we can, again, embed this in our approval process, or we can kind of do this in the side as we need it throughout our entire life cycle. So that's great. We've come up with a potential solution for the money, but then what about the people? 98% of the clients we work with, they're all cost constrained. It's just a reality that people don't have the people to do the work. So what we want to start thinking about is what is our capacity to deliver this portfolio of projects? And what you're going to see here is now we go from that 80-something%, now we're down to 32%. My God, what happened? Well, you can see here, if you look at the timing of the projects, they're all happening at about the same time, and they're all happening with about the same pool of resources. If I hop over here to requirements, and this shows some of our constraints, you can see there are certain projects here that are not selected. E-commerce, shared GPS, biothermal. What the system's doing, it's showing us by role how many FTEs we are short. We can't do these projects because we don't have the people to deliver them. And what this requires is the setup of some of the resource planning components, setting up different roles like a product engineer, a product manager, and a product manager, and setting up a max capacity for that role that's going to map over to the people that play that role. And this is a really, really helpful tool for a manager who can then go in and say, well, it's great. I know we've got $11 million. The problem is I don't have the people. So, when you think about it from a portfolio management perspective, we have a couple of options. Option one is we can move the timeline. We can start to slide projects out. If I take 2 projects and move them out, will that solve my problem? And if I recalculate it, it may say, no, it doesn't make a difference at all. Or you know what, by delaying 2 projects a quarter, it doesn't change anything. So we've still got a resource constraint. If we think about the triple constraint, we can change the timeline, but we can also add resources. So you see there's a little area here that says hire resources in the metrics area. So if I said, what if I brought 4 people into the organization as contractors? If I added people to this portfolio, would that then allow me to do more projects? And you can pretty much guess the answer to this. So what the system is actually doing, it's running a scenario with 4 added FTEs for the highest priority projects. And what you see now is we've got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 projects that we couldn't do before staffing wise, we can now do by adding 4 headcount. We've just come up with a really good solution. Delaying work doesn't do it, but adding people does. And how do I know what people I should add? There's a tab here that says reports. There is a deficit and surplus report, but there's one here called hired resources. And what this is going to do is going to say for those 4 people you're bringing in, hiring or contracting, who should they be? And maybe it's going to show you, I need a product engineer on our e-commerce or portal project here. Make this a little wider for you. Starting when? And then potentially how many hours do I need them for? And if I had a blended hourly rate, it would start to calculate how much money am I going to need to actually fill that role. So you can start doing blended rates and hours, and it can start telling you you're going to be adding, $1 to $2.5 million in cost to add this number of people, this FTE headcount, to get those projects done. So at the end of the day, it does come back to money. But if you have additional resources, hey, I can borrow 3 product engineers from another group I have, then it cuts it down to just the tester. Now I only need this many hours over the next 3 or 4 years, and I can focus on that. So again, what it's going to do, it's going to really let you do that scenario modeling, portfolio modeling around your money and your people to make sure you're doing the right investments, but that you can actually staff them and you can afford them. You'll again see there's a button here that says commit, and there's also a save as. So we may save this as our add for headcount at $11 million portfolio solution. Again, the same as before, we can then run a comparison. And this is going to show us, again, which projects, which ones are resourced, which ones are not resourced, how many constraints, how many FTEs do I need at the top, and what is the strategic value? We certainly don't want a portfolio with a strategic value of 32%, 74, 75, 70%, 6%. That's getting a lot closer to what the target we want as an organization. And this is really the value of the portfolio modeling. It allows you to do this what-if analysis to get to a point where you can make the right decisions on people and dollars that align with the strategies and goals and the projects you're planning to do. Okay. So hopefully that gave you a pretty good feeling for what the technology can do. How do you get started? A lot of people are like, we really want to get started with this. What do we need to do first? The first thing you need to think about is having some kind of a strategy around how you're going to be doing portfolio decision making. Is it simply get together once a year, make decisions with the key executives, have 5 business drivers, and have that decide what projects we're going to do in one department, division, or on a program? Or is this an enterprise strategy we need to develop? It really ties back to what is your organizational strategy for doing portfolio decision making. You need to have some kind of an intake mechanism where new requests are coming into the tool, filling in data, where you can then score each project against those and look at a resource forecast and a cost forecast, as well as the relative value of each one. You need to come up with that rating and scoring model. And that's one of the things where we look at those business drivers. What are your organizational business drivers? If you already have that, that's fantastic. If not, you need to start to think about that. You need to have an interested group of stakeholders. And this may seem obvious, but unless you have someone that really sees value in doing this kind of analysis, unless there's a problem to solve, then why are you doing it? And maybe you have an IT or a product group that's saying, hey, I really have a hard time prioritizing the work every year. I don't know who's working on what people do I need, and how many dollars do I need? That's probably a really good use case for this type of a solution. You got to have potential projects and investments that are coming in. What are you thinking about doing over the next 6 or 12 months? And behind each project, you need to have a basic timeline. How long is the project going to go? You need to have a sense of what is the project at a high level going to cost us? So it's not a detailed WBS with lots of tasks and activities. If you have that, that's even better because you have the detail and the scope. But if you can just do a top level cost on the project, that's great. And also you need to forecast the resources. That's roles. What roles do I need at what FTE headcount to deliver on this project? We, again, don't need the detailed detailed schedule, but it'd be nice to have it if you do have it. You also need to start thinking about strategic alignment and making sure those scorings that you come up with align with the projects and the investments you're going to make. You can come up with a great scoring model, and once you sit down with your projects, you realize none of these really align with any of that stuff. It may add no value. But you want to start thinking about what are my OKRs, my organizational key results, the goals and the KPIs I want to measure. Then I can plug those into the system. You obviously need to have some kind of a system to support this. Having a Microsoft PPM system is a great way to go because most people already own it and they use it for their execution tool. And again, Project Online should be deployed and you should have it with a Plan 5 license. That is the license required to do some of the portfolio analysis once the system is set up that we talked about. So, we've been doing this stuff for a while. What are some deployment lessons learned from working with lots of clients? The first one is really understand your maturity as an organization and where you are, and ask the question, are we really ready to do this analysis and modeling? Some organizations have been ready for years. Let's go. It's time to do this. We're tired of doing this manually or not doing it all. Other organizations were really trying to get the blocking and tackling of project execution out of the way. Then we can get into more strategic portfolio selection. It all gets back to your maturity as an organization. The other question is, do you have any of the data required to do this kind of analysis? You have to have data on your projects and potential projects. You have to have a basic process and understanding of it, of the key stakeholders. You have to have some kind of metrics you're going to measure it against. Is there any existing data that you have on your projects and your pipeline that you can leverage? This is really important. Having an existing system where you've got your existing projects in there gives you a foundation for adding new ones and comparing new to existing and then filtering in new ones into your pipeline. If you're starting from scratch, you don't have anything in there, it may be a little bit of a challenge to do this stuff because you're not really comparing it to anything or any history you have. We generally recommend you pilot these solutions. Start with a specific business unit or a department or a product area or a domain to prove out the effectiveness. And once you show people that, it's going to spread like wildfire. People really want to use this stuff, but they have to see it working in your organization. They may think it's too difficult or they don't have the maturity or the data to do it. But if you show it can be done, focus on piloting it. You can start to roll it out more broadly over time. You also want to start thinking about who's going to be your key decision makers, not only with the system and how it's going to be set up, but with the process. Who's going to determine what those business drivers are? How often is that going to happen? Who makes the final call on the projects? How are they going to be involved in the process? There's no secret sauce to this at all. It's really about involving the people and really determining how many voices are going to be part of that process. We've worked with a lot of organizations that started out and said, PMO is great. We're going to start with 4 of us. Next thing you know, you have some executives and sponsors get in the room. You got 15 or 20 folks that are involved in the process, and it completely takes it in a different direction. So keeping it as focused as possible, making sure those stakeholders can definitely agree on what's important and what the business drivers are is really critical to success. Finally, as we start thinking about this, we want to look at the integration of the tool and the process at a basic level. If you can incorporate this into your existing approval workflow, all the better. Otherwise, people are going to figure out ways to go around it. And then if they start going around it, they're going to figure out ways to work the system. It doesn't become as valuable versus every project has to go through this starting on this date. And this date may not be for 12 months, but you can start to do it on a quarterly basis and then mandate it on an annual rolling review basis. The last thing you need is some patience. This stuff does take time. And while the technology can be plugged in very quickly, getting people to use and adopt it and follow the process and really iterate on that over time, it does take time, so we do recommend some patience. So hopefully we gave you a good overview of what's possible from a process and technology perspective and gave you some recommendations on deployment. At this point, I'm going to open the floor to questions. Annie, do we have any questions in the Q&A window?
Rob, no questions at this time.
Okay, well, we will keep it open. I'll hand it back to you, Annie, to wrap things up here.
To learn more about how PROJILITY can assist with evaluating or deploying your PPM environment, or to come up with a plan for implementation, reach out, and we'll set up some time to review your needs. I'm Annie Levand with PROJILITY. My contact information is listed here. Thank you all for attending our webinar today. Have a great day.